Hi, this is Ray Snesrud here at Water Heaters Now. And what we're going to do in this video is show you how to do a cleaning on a Navien. This is a combination boiler. The model is NCB 240. So what it does is it heats the water for bathrooms and sinks, and it also provides in-floor heat for 2,000 square feet of in-floor. And it does all that out of this compact little box. It's pretty cool. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the cover off. We're going to inspect the flame. We want to see a nice blue flame, and after that we'll disconnect power and do the cleaning. And after you remove the screws, you just pull the bottom out toward you, and it's hanging on a latch on the top, and go ahead and pull it off the top. And then the cover's free and you have access to the boiler and water heater inside. So I'm just going to set this aside. And now I'm going to call for heat so you can visualize the flame through this window. So we'll get set up for that. So we have a fresh air intake pipe, and then we have an exhaust pipe. The fresh air intake's on the left, and when the cover's off, you look inside, you'll see a white mounted screen just underneath that. It's a filter. In case any bugs or anything get in the pipe, it'll catch that, or any other debris. It prevents a lot of micro problematic particles from getting inside your boiler when it's pulling the fresh air in to mix with the gas. So we're going to take that off. There's one screw in the front. And then sometimes you have to take one or two of the housing screws out from the top in order to pull that filter out. So we'll give you a closer look. So we're going to pull this front screw out. You kind of pull back as you're undoing it, and you'll feel it release from the threads. And then you want to catch that screw. Takes a little bit of dexterity. That in your fingers, and as you can see, it's catching on this screw and this screw, which go in from the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unhook the right screw. I'm going to bring that up. It'll be the front right corner of this intake housing, and you can watch it come out as I undo it from the top. Well, if you can see that moving on this side of the housing, it's coming out. Okay, so now that we have the front screw out and the two from the top, we just scoot this out from the housing. And if there is any garbage inside the filter, it would be caught there. But even after years of use, this is clean as a whistle. So the bug screen on the outside of the pipe is doing its job. So we're just going to go ahead and reinsert that and screw it back into place. And just like that, you have checked and tested your filter, and it's all resecured in place. So we're going to remove the cold water inlet filter. Before we do, we're going to isolate the heater. So we're going to turn the cold water off to the heater using this isolation valve. And we're going to turn off the hot water isolation valve too. So now no cold water can get in and no hot water can get out. And these are the service ports that we're going to use to clean the heater. And we'll dump all the water out of the heater now, out of those ports, before we take the cold water inlet filter off. Otherwise, water would come gushing out the filter. So the very next thing I'm going to do is hook up hoses to the hot and cold service ports and allow the water heater to drain down. Okay, so I'm going to remove the cap on the cold water service valve, and I'm going to remove the cap on the hot water service valve also. And now I'm going to connect garden hoses to both sides. Hot's a little harder to get to, so I'm going to do that one first. And just snug with your fingers is good enough. You don't have to crank these down with the wrench. It's the O-ring that makes the seal anyway. So now I'm going to put this in the cold side and tighten it in. And now I'm going to take the ends of these hoses, put them in a bucket, and now I'm going to open the isolation valves, and that will drain the heater. And there's about a quart at the most of water inside of a tankless unit, but there's something there that needs to be drained. Otherwise, you're going to spill water all over yourself when you go to remove the cold water inlet filter. So this is the condensation. It's a condensing boiler water heater, so it constantly allows a flow of condensation through that pipe. On the back side of the condensation, you have what's called the dirt trap. And there's a pin that comes out very easily. Looks like this. And then we just take the dirt trap and we pull it down, and there will be a little bit of water and likely some dirt inside that trap. So I'm going to go ahead and dump this dirt out, and then I'll rinse the dirt out of the bottom. Now there should be an O-ring seated here. If you take this dirt trap out and there's no O-ring, it's still located in the housing. So you have to take that O-ring out and slide it over the edge before you put it back in. And if you don't do that, you'll pinch the O-ring and you'll end up having a leak in your heater. So these are the components of the dirt trap. There's the dirt trap itself, and then the O-ring that was in the housing. So you actually just use this and hook it and pull it out. So now you just put that O-ring back on. It seats on the first ledge. Now we're going to push it back in, and we'll insert this from the side the same way that we took it off. So we install the dirt leg back into the housing with the O-ring connected. And then we take the clip, and from the side it just goes through the 4 holes that you see. And it snaps in. When you grab the dirt leg and try to pull it down and it's stuck in there, that tells you that the pin is holding properly. So at this point, the water heater's been drained. We've cleaned the air filter. We've cleaned the dirt trap. Now we're going to take out the water inlet filter and see if that needs to be cleaned. So we're going to take the pliers and put it on the inlet water filter and just give it a couple of small turns until it feels loose enough that you feel relatively confident you can take it out the rest of the way with your hands. I think that'll be good. I'll try to get this with my fingers. Still pretty snug. See if I can get it now. There we go. So here's the cold inlet filter. It's a very fine screen. So what we're going to do is we're just going to run water over that with a toothbrush and push the finer bristles into those holes to clean out any junk, clean the outside of the filter, clean the threads, clean the O-ring, and just make it ready to go again for some more years use. So the filter's been cleaned, and the way you know that if it's clean or not, it's just a very fine mesh. When you're done, you just take it, you put it up into the light and spin it in your hands. And if there's any debris still caught in the screen, you'll see it. In this case, it's totally clean, so it's ready to be reinstalled. So again, this part also has an O-ring right there. We want to make sure that that O-ring is in place before we reinstall it. There's an O-ring in the groove here. As long as you have it out, roll it in your fingers, inspect it to make sure there's no tears. Roll this one in your fingers, inspect it to make sure there's no tears. Then you're ready to reinsert it, and after it's finger tight, You can use a pliers on this because sometimes they just get a little tough to work with in their older age. But you don't want to crank it down into the brass. You definitely want to have it seat on the O-rings. And then when you're done, just give it a couple of final touches with your wrench. So now I've tightened it as far as I can with my fingers. I'm going to grab it by the side and spin it in. You want to be very careful not to squeeze this part too hard with your pliers to turn it, because it is just plastic and you could break it. So you just want to put friction on each side of the part with your pliers, spin it, and when it kind of says I've had enough, the O-rings are buried and you're good to go. So that's fixed. And now we're ready to begin the process of pumping vinegar into the cold side through the heat exchanger, and it'll come out the hot side. And as we do that, it's going to descale the coil bundle of heat exchanger on the domestic side. That's the side that heats the water that comes out of your sinks and showers. So we're going to pump vinegar through there, just regular white vinegar. We have a sump pump and bucket all ready to go. So we're going to begin that process and let it descale. All right, so in this bucket we have 2 gallons of white vinegar, and we have a sump pump with a garden hose connector on it. So that garden hose out of the sump pump is coming into the cold side valve. So we're going to pump vinegar in through the cold side, and the vinegar will come out the hot side back into the bucket, and we're just going to cycle that vinegar through the heat exchanger for about 40 minutes. So if any scaling is built up, if there's any debris in there, we're going to do a good job flushing it out. And at the end of that flush, we'll push the vinegar out of the system with regular cold water, so that's no longer in the system. So we're going to go ahead and plug the sump pump in and begin that process right now. All right, so we have the sump pump connected to a garden hose inside the vinegar. That's going to the cold side. And this is the hose coming out of the hot side, and it's just going to pump the vinegar right back in the bucket, and we'll let it cycle through. All right, so we're plugging it in to begin pumping through the heat exchanger. Now we're just going to let that hose sit. And there's already a little bit of brown discoloration in the vinegar, showing that we had some scaling inside, and it's a good thing that we're cleaning this out when we did. Okay, so now that we have pumped vinegar through the system for an adequate amount of time, I suppose we did it 25, 35 minutes, and there's hardly any dirt at all, hardly any discoloration in the vinegar after it was pumped through, so it was in good shape. So now what we're going to do, we can disconnect the cold line. So I'm going to do that now. So I've turned off the service port valve. Now I'm going to put the cap on. And now that's sealed, I'm going to open the cold water valve and allow cold water into the water heater. I'm going to leave the isolation valve off on the hot side, and I'll open the service valve. So all the cold water will go into the heater, and it'll purge through all the vinegar type water out the hot side, and we'll just run that right into the floor drain. So we'll do that for a matter of 1 to 2 minutes, and we'll be satisfied that all the vinegar is out of the system at that point. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now by opening this and then opening the main valve to the cold side. So now I'm going to remove the hose from the hot side service port. I'm going to install the cap on the hot side service port. I'm going to turn the cold on to the unit. I'm going to turn the hot on to the hot system. So we don't have to do a cleaning on the boiler side. And the reason for that is the domestic side goes through a bundle of tubes that could gather scaling. The heating side goes through a flat plate heat exchanger, and there's no descaling that. So for that reason, we don't have to clean these. In the event that they have to be cleaned, you could do it but the manufacturer recommends not cleaning the boiler side of the unit, only the domestic side. So we're at a point where we're ready to turn the switch on and fire this unit back up. Okay, so at this time we just flip the switch on. The boiler water heater has a memory, so it's going to continue operating at the same temperature for everything that comes out the sinks, and it's going to operate at the same temperature for what was in the floor. So now I'll just put a cover back on the unit and it's good to go.